Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of a 3-part series on how to program drum beats and drum loops using Ableton Live 9. My name's Tom Cosm, and this one we're going to be talking about using multiple MIDI tracks. So in the first one we used multiple audio tracks, so we dragged samples into audio tracks and manipulated them kind of manually. This way we're going to be using samplers and MIDI information to trigger the samples in the samplers. Before I start, there's a bit of background noise because Chelsea's making awesome dinner. Say hello, Chelsea. We're on an island at the moment, so space is limited. Okay, so because we're just using MIDI tracks, we don't need these two audio tracks. This is kind of the default setup that Ableton gives us when we start a new project, so I'm going to get rid of those by just hitting delete. And we're going to be working in arrangement view, so hit the tab key to go in arrangement view, or you can do it up here. The reason I like to work in arrangement view when I'm working with multiple tracks to construct a drum loop is because you can see everything in front of you. If you're using a single MIDI track in a drum rack, for example, it can be quite easy to use it in session view, but because we're going to have multiple MIDI tracks, it's nice to have them all laid out, and we can also go from left to right across a timeline, which is good. So I've got two MIDI tracks here. First thing I'm going to do is grab my loop point, drag it to number 1, zoom in up the top here, and we'll drag the endpoint to 2, so that means it's just 1 bar loop. Turn the loop on, and we're going to introduce something into this MIDI track here. Now, MIDI tracks work in the way that they have a machine on them that needs to be sent information in order for it to work. So unlike an audio track that just plays a sample or a waveform, these actually have machines and information. So I'm going to go into my instruments up here. These are the native instruments in Live 9 Suite. And we've got a bunch of things. We've got synths and whatnot. I'm going to be using a sampler today, which funnily enough is a sampler. So if I double click that, it's added the machine down here. It's asking me to drop a sample. So it's saying, what sample do you want to play? And then I need to give it information by filling in this part here. Excuse me. So down to my sample packs. Again, I'm going to be using this Xmas special pack that I put out at Christmas. Some people were a bit confused in the last video about where to get this. This is for pro members in the pro member download area at www.cosm.co.nz. So it is a pro membership thing. So let's open up our kicks. We've got 10 cool kicks here. Let's have a listen. Remember to have this preview on, or else you won't be able to hear any of them. Let's go with 8 today, and we're going to make this one a bit kind of 4/4, tech housey, techno, whatever you like. 4/4. It doesn't really get a genre until you start adding more elements to it, but that'll do. So I'm going to make it 128 BPM. That's all good. I've got my sample in there. That means, right, I'm ready to play the sample. And I'm going to select the area on the MIDI track where I want to put in the information or the MIDI information to play it. And I'm going to use Command-Shift-M, or that would be Control-Shift-M on a PC to add a MIDI clip. So it gives me this colored square. And by double-clicking it, we have our MIDI editor window down here, which looks like a piano flipped on its side. Now, with a sampler, you can play individual notes just like you would a synthesizer or whatever, but C3, which is this note here, you'll notice as I move up and down, it tells us what notes we're working with. C3 plays the sample at its original pitch. So I've got my preview on here as well. So if you're moving this around, you're not hearing anything, make sure this little headphone is blue. So if I click on this and move it up, you can hear it pitches the sample up. And if I go down below C3, we go really low. So that can be a lot of fun to play with. We might get into some crazy stuff with that technique soon, but for now, I'm just using the up arrow. We'll get it on C3 because we want it to play the kick as it originally was sampled. Now, I've got that. I've just added that in. What I did is I double-clicked right here. It added in a note, and I moved the endpoint to drag it out so it is 1 beat. So you see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this will be the end of the bar. So I want it on every fourth four to the floor, so every beat of the bar. So we've got 1 there, and if I do Command or Control D, it'll duplicate that for me, and again and again. So now we have 4 beats in 1 bar, and they're all the same pitch, and it's going to go donk, 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 donk. Excellent. Sounding pretty good so far. So I'm just going to leave that for the kick for now. Now we're going to add in a snare. So into my snares folder, let's have a listen for a snare. Let's go for snare 8 as well. So in this extra MIDI track that I had here, I'm going to do exactly the same as I did for the kick. I'm going to go to Instruments, I'm going to add a sampler by double clicking. You can also drag and drop it, and go back into our sample pack and drag in snare 8. You can use any samples you like here. I'm just using these because they are available to my members. So again, select that area, Control-Shift-M, add a MIDI track. Now, what we want to do here is with the snare usually goes on just the second and just the fourth beat of the bar. So let's add that in. Again, using C3. Notice my headphone icon isn't on, so it didn't play. Let's turn that on. The headphones are playing up. There we go. And also, we want to duplicate this over to number 4. Now, if we hit D, we can do it 3 times and delete the middle one. That's all good. But the quicker way is to hold down the Option key, this is on a Mac, and click on the note and drag it, and it will duplicate it and leave the original in place. So now we have snare on the second and the fourth, kick on all of the beats. Let's listen. Not bad. So for these two things, they're quite structurally important elements of a drum loop. So that's why I've given them their own track. That's because they have their own track, it means you can go in and add your own effects and EQ tools to these individual things later on, once you're starting to get everything sounding tight. But for things like hi-hats, I'll just introduce a new MIDI track here. Insert MIDI track, or Command-Shift-T is the shortcut. I'm going to call this hats. You'll notice how it's automatically named the tracks for us based on what the sample was in the sampler for the kick and the snare. That's pretty cool. But this one it won't. Hats. I'm going to use a instrument here which is another type of sampler, but it can take multiple samples, and that's called an impulse. So an impulse has 8 slots, as you can see. So the sampler just has one big slot. Impulse has 8 slots, and then these are more handy for things like hi-hats when you want to kind of have multiple different sounding hi-hats in just one MIDI track. So by going into my Extra Special again, hi-hats, we've got these closed hats here. Oh, we've got a crash there for some reason. Let's use this number 8 again. Fan of the 8s. I'm going to drag this into the first slot, and I won't drag any more in for now. We'll just create a MIDI loop for this machine. Open it up, and let's add in some hi-hats. Now you see how the grid here, instead of giving us a piano, it's given us the actual names of the slots that are in the impulse. So there is my closed hat in slot number 1 in the MIDI track. It's said closed hat is in slot number 1, and all these are currently empty. The grid here is quite tiny, so that means it's cut the beats up into very small increments. So here's a beat, half a beat, quarter of a beat, eighth of a beat. So they're going really small. We can change that by Command 2 to make the grid bigger, or 1 to make them smaller. And this is handy because when you double click, it's going to snap to wherever you add that note. So if I have them really small, we don't really want hi-hats here because we want them to be more spaced out. And accidentally deleted it. So let's add in some hi-hats. I'm going to add in one here. Duplicate. Or you can do things like select 4 of them and hit duplicate. I tend to do things the long way because I'm an idiot. So let's listen. Sounds like a really bad drum machine preset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these notes here. I want them to be double time. So I selected all the notes. I hit Command 1 to make the grids half the size. Boom, like that. And let's drag this back to there. And now I can hold down the Option key, remember to duplicate, and drag these across here. And we have double time. And you'll notice the level of the hi-hat is much higher than the snare and the kick here. So let's just bring the level down. Now the cool thing about using a sampler like this is in the piano roll we have this area underneath each individual note which has kind of a bar with a dot on the top, and this is the velocity. So velocity usually is a parameter which defines the volume or the amplitude of what is currently playing. You can attach the velocity to quite a lot of other things within synthesizers and samplers, but by default in the impulse this is attached to the velocity. So we can check that out by going to the impulse, clicking on the sample, make sure it's highlighted, and you see here where the volume is, we've got velocity at 70%. So that means that wherever that velocity thing is, it's going to affect the volume by 70%. I'm going to turn this all the way up to 100 just so you can get an idea. So if we go in here, if we have this at up to 127, it's going to play 100% of the volume, which in this case is 0 dB, and if it's at the bottom, it's going to play 0%. So that means that we can go through and we can change some of these notes to play different volumes, which again adds a bit of a human characteristic to it and doesn't make it sound like a computer. So let's just have a quick listen to that. Now you don't just have to click and drag on the little dots at the top of the things, you can hold down the Command or Option key and hover over the note and drag, which is a lot quicker actually, rather than trying to pinpoint those little little guys. Another thing you can do is you can select a range of notes like this and hold down the Command or Option key and draw a line, and it will adjust them for you like that. Cool, so now we've got a bit of a groove going on with our hi-hats. What we can do is we can add some more hi-hats to give it a bit of variation. So let's have a listen. Let's go with that one. And that one. Now what we can do is we can go through, you'll see we have new hi-hats here and these slots that were previously empty. We can go through and we could just select a note, just click on it or drag it, and we can move it up or down to select a different hi-hat, and we can turn the headphones on as well for this. Let's try that, and I'm just kind of randomly picking hi-hats. Maybe we can change the velocity of the new ones we added. Now we can also go in and change various things about each individual samples. So that one there is a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the decay. I just clicked the play symbol in the top of the sample there, by the way. So if I change the decay, which is how long it takes to kind of stop playing, we can change it. So we can also change the pitch by using the transpose. Let's change the decay of this one and make them really short. Let's try transposing it. I think this one's a bit too low. Sounding pretty good. Now for the open hi-hat part. The open hi-hats, you can add the open hi-hats into this impulse as well. Open hi-hats are the things that kind of go ch on the off beats. So might use this one. You can get these really harsh ones. Things like that. I like those ones, but I think for this one we're going to go a little bit more mellow. So I'm going to use number 3, drag it into the 5th slot here, and you can see here's number 3, and put them on the off beats, which is the which is the point 1.2.3, 1.3.3, etc. So just holding down the Option key to duplicate those. And we can select all 4 of those notes and drag one of the velocities up, and it'll bring them up. Let's go into that hi-hat and change something. Let's change the decay of it. Not bad. Let's try a different sample. Let's try one of those harsh ones instead. Don't really want that. Could be a good one. We can bring the over volume down if we want. Let's use that 3, I like that one. So sometimes what I do is I separate the open hi-hats from the closed hi-hats because I might want to be able to control them separately, like add different effects to opens and closed. But for this one I'm going to stick with that because I'm actually quite liking how that's going. Very good. So that's kind of a basic structure of a 4/4 beat. I'm going to be adding more to this, but that's your hi-hats, your snares, and your kicks. Now what we need to consider is a groove, so a bit of a swing. So at the moment this is sounding very computerized. It's got no real groove to it. Adding those little volume amplitude changes does give it a bit of a groove to it, but it doesn't have an actual groove in the sense that it's swinging or it's displacing notes to give it a bit of human feel. So I'm going to go into my my packs up here, go into my core library, go into my swing and groove. You'll all have this if you have the Ableton Live Suite installed. And here are all of our grooves. Remember, grooves are kind of a set of instructions that can be applied to clips like this that change the way they work and how they interact. So again, let's go into swing, and we've got a wee preview here, so we can click on one of these and listen to how it's actually going to affect these or displace the notes for us. So that could be a good one. I'm going to drag that into my groove pool, so this is where all my grooves currently live, and then I can drag this on top of anything within the project. So let's have a listen to how that's affected it. Let's add 1665. So these numbers at the end are the intensity of the swing. That's quite good. I'm going to make that snare. I'm going to change that snare actually. So let's go into hat, close the hats. Let's try snare 3. Very good. Now, a good practice is to drag that groove onto everything else. So I'm going to do that. Even though we don't have any 16th notes for it to affect within the snare or the kick, it's good to do it in case we want to add some little rolls into the snare, for example, if I wanted to go like this. So without it, the snare would go. With it, it goes. So that's just good practice. We'll get into fills in a minute. Okay, so that's kind of our foundation here. So what I'm going to do is select it all by dragging from the bottom right to the top left. I'm going to Command D, and let's do it 4 times to duplicate that. So now we have a cool 4-bar loop. Now a little bit of variation is in order, I think. What I like to do is play with the snare on this kind of 2nd bar and then give it a wee fill at the end of the 4th bar. So let's just go into the snare. We could add maybe a snare here. You'll notice how with the sampler, if the note is shorter, it'll play the sample much shorter for us. So if we put in 2 really fast ones, not bad. I wonder if the velocity, okay, the velocity is not connected to the volume by default. So you see if I move this around, it's not actually changing the volume, but we can fix that by going into the sampler and where are we? Into the MIDI area. And here we have the velocity and we can assign that to something, and we want to assign that to the volume. And then how much do you want to assign it to the volume? 100. So now the velocity, that little knob that I was tweaking, is assigned to the volume. But because I chose it at 100, it's going to be a bit louder than usual. And I'm going to close the grid down a bit. Maybe one more. Just put a snare here. And we did that little fill before with the 4 snares. I like that, so let's do that again. And let's select those, and remember how I held down the command key before and did slope to change the velocity of all 3 of the notes. Maybe even we could take these and duplicate them like that, select them and drag a velocity curve like that. Awesome. Now let's add in something else. I'm going to MIDI track, Command Shift T. Let's add in percussion. We've got some bongos here. Just 4 simple bongos. And let's use an impulse for that as well. So go to our instruments, add an impulse, go back to our sample and load in bongo 1, bongo 2, bongo 3, bongo 4. Let's add in just 1 bar loop here. Remember to add the swing to it, or else it's going to play very computerized sounding against the swing sounding, which doesn't sound good at all. And let's put in 1 bongo here. So because I was messing with the velocity before, it's got the velocity down, so we need to bring that up. Turn on the headphones. And I'm just going to start placing these around. Let's change the loop just back to 1 while we're working on the bongos. Maybe that one there. Not bad. We could put like a little fill here maybe. Make these small and bring the volume down quite a lot. Just kind of leads up to it. Not really. We can also move these around. so they don't have to be on the grid, which can be kind of come in handy sometimes if you want little flams. You know, when people play bongo drums and they kind of smack it with both hands, but they don't quite hit perfectly in time to give that little kind of double up sound. If you click on a note and move it, you'll notice you can move it freely until it snaps to something, and then it starts snapping again. So if it does start snapping and not moving freely, let go and click again and move it. So let's just bring it back a little bit. Hear that has a little bit of a difference? Let's put one here as well. I've got to zoom in a bit to grab that note. Maybe here. Great. Now with these bongos, let's add some effects. So I'm going to put in a reverb here. So the default is quite spacious. So bring the size down, bring the decay time down, and bring the dry wet down. Remembering dry wet is how much of the reverb is applied. You could put a delay on that could sound quite cool. A ping pong delay might sound pretty good. Bring the dry wet down because you don't want too much of it. Maybe at 2 would be cool. Or 1. It's quite loud. Awesome. Now I'm going to name this bongos. What else we got in the percussion? Where are we? Samples. Crash cymbals always good. So I'm going to use, we'll use a MIDI track for that because we're using MIDI tracks. Again, instruments. We want to use the sampler because it's just one sample, and there is a crash. We'll add that in. It's going to be quite loud, so I'm just going to bring the volume down. Initially, add in a MIDI clip, add in our C3 note, and that'll just play a crash at the start of the bar. Make sure to duplicate this across. And we can add a few variations in this bongo. Don't like that echo. Okay, here's something cool we can do. Turn the sync off so it's not at a fixed time. That's quite cool. So playing with that little the millisecond delay time. So this is the time between each individual delay. So if this is up quite high, so the time between each delay is 374 milliseconds. If we bring it down really short, it starts really kind of giving it a ring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record that little phrase and play with this because it sounds cool. I'm just going to take the MIDI arm off this because if I hit record while that is on, it's going to overwrite what's currently here. And now I just have to hit record and move this around. Very good. Hit stop and it's recorded that for us. Now we need a bit of a build-up thing here. So one thing we can do is let's actually, I might use an audio track here if you don't mind. There's another crash. It's a big one. Let's drag it out through the whole duration and we can reverse it. So that kind of creates a nice sucking up effect. It seems to peak around here, which is interesting. I'll turn the warping off. There we go. So because it was warped, it was stretching it to the whole 4 bars, which was creating that weird backwards effect, which wasn't really making it build up well enough. So by turning off warping, it's just playing the original sample backwards without any change in pitch or speed. So now I can move this around. If I hold down the command key while I'm dragging it, it lets me drag it off the grid. So I'm just going to match that up right there. And another cool thing to do with these suck ups, or whatever you want to call them, is to sidechain it to the bass, the kick drum. You don't have to do this, but I like doing it. It's pretty standard. You hear it a lot, but it's because it sounds good, right? So by adding in a compressor here, we can pull up the sidechain. Sidechain says this compressor needs to work based on the input of another audio channel, and that audio channel is, of course, the kick, and it's going to say when the kick happens, bring the volume down of the actual sample that's in here, which is a reversed crash. So by turning on sidechain, audio from, I'm going to choose audio from the kick, and just bring my threshold down. So now when the kick plays, this should kind of give a pumping effect. Now another cool thing you can do with the impulse, just while I think of it, is that velocity. Remember I said it can be attached to the volume. It can also be attached to a filter. So to give you an example of this, I'm actually going to duplicate this bongo track. So we have a separate one because I'm quite happy with how that is. Let's go in here. I'm going to get rid of the ping pong delay and the reverb. So this one's preserved all that. And actually let's get rid of the MIDI clips altogether. So I'm going to play... Let's play that one. If I turn on MIDI arm here and I have my virtual keyboard enabled, I can actually play them with my QWERTY keyboard. So this is A, S, and D. And I'm just doing this so I can hit it over and over. Now with the filter, you have to turn it on. So of course we've got a frequency. This is a low pass, see, cut off. So it's going to cut off all the frequencies over a certain point, and you define the point by this frequency knob here. By giving it resonance, it kind of really amplifies or accents the point where it cuts off. And by adding velocity to it, now we can go in and create a new MIDI clip, and that velocity will control the cutoff point of the frequency of the filter, not the volume. Well, it will control the volume as well, but that just means it's kind of like saying the drummer is going to hit the bongo less because it'll be cut off. So let's have a listen. It'll solo the track, which it's this one, isn't it? So you see as I bring the velocity up, let's add in some more notes so you can get a better effect. And bring the loop points down so we can just loop and play with this for a bit. So that's just one drum sound, and by attaching the velocity to the filter, we can kind of get quite a lot of expression out of it. It's a stupid note. If we bring the resonance up, it'll really sing. So we've kind of created an instrument in a way out of that. It's quite cool. Let's change the transpose of the original sample, see how it sounds. Let's bring the dry wet down of that ping pong delay on the original bongos. Okay, it's too low. But you can see where you can go with that. You can take a bongo and turn it into a bass line if you're clever enough. Let's change the decay on it. We need to give it the swing. That's what I forgot. Here, without the swing, it sounds out of time with the rest of the things we've done. But with the swing, now, as I move that transpose knob, you'll see that the line here actually moves up and down. So this line, the automation line, corresponds to where this is currently at. So we could, in theory, click on there, click another point, oops, and drag it down. so it will go down over the period of the bar. That's kind of cool. Let's give it a reverb, make it really crazy. And we'll go into that kind of reverse crash, and we'll drag the compressor holding down the Option key and duplicate it over to that track. Bring the hi-hats down a bit. Sounding good. Now I'm going to add one more thing. We'll add the impulse here. Actually, I got two more things. Last thing's really cool. Go into our percussion here. We've got some toms. Some of them are quite digital, which would make quite good bass kind of tones. Six, 7, 8, 9. Whoops. And it's quite cool as well. Let's just fill it all up. We already used that one. So now we can go ahead and use those toms in ways that they're not supposed to be used. We can kind of try and make a bass line with them. I'm just going to add one on the offbeat where the open hi-hats plays. We'll just add it on every single one, just giving that kind of fuktung effect to start with. It's a good starting place. Remember to give it a swing. We could add, hang on, let's make the grid smaller so it's easy to see. We could add one in here. Add the swing to it. Let's change that 8-1 to, where is it here? Let's bring the transpose right down. But because these are playing such low notes, very low in the frequency spectrum, if we load up a spectrum, we can see that. See, these are very, very low frequencies. These are your high frequencies. The problem is they're going to be clashing with the kick, because the kick also has very low frequencies. So let's use another compressor, and we'll sidechain it as well, just so this gets out of the way when the kick plays. So sidechain, input, kick, threshold down. Now the cool thing here is we could add some effects to kind of give it some more characteristics to make it sound more bassy. I didn't mean to make a bass line out of tom drums, but this is a redux. So a redux kind of downsamples, digitally downsamples it, which can create some pretty harsh overtones. Let's make it in soft mode so it's not so intense. That's awesome. So this downsample, again, we've got an automation line that is corresponds to that knob. So let's just add some points. So this one goes down while the bongo thing goes up. I'm just playing around with this. We can extend the automation by clicking on this square down here. It gives us a separate automation lane. That's good because now we can select just the automation and duplicate it. Command D. I kind of liked it before when it was just going down. Up, I mean. Now, because we're working, this has become kind of a baseline, it would be a good idea at this point to turn these into a group. So I'm going to select all of these, right-click them, and group them. Now, the reason I've done this is it puts it into a chain. So a group is this kind of a virtual rack of various things that are all kind of like a chain, a collection of devices and instruments all in one individual chain. And I do that because what we want to do, actually, sorry, I take that back. I'm just going to group the compressor and the redux. So this creates an audio effect rack for us. So the signal is going from here into the rack, and then it's going to get processed through the chain. But we can actually have more than one chain, so it splits the audio to here and to here. Now the reason I do that is because this chain here we want to have as the sub, and this one we can just call this the main. And the reason you do this is because you really want the sub to be in mono, and you don't really want to be affecting it like you are affecting the high end of things. So this sub thing, we need to add an EQ8. So an EQ8 is something to get rid of particular frequencies. So we want this to just be the sub, so we can turn this pole here into a low pass pole and bring it down. So now when we play this, if I just solo the sub track, excellent, and we need to put a utility after it. So a utility, you can change the width of the sound. So basically you can turn a stereo sound into mono. So we bring the width down to 0%. So now you probably won't be able to tell any difference, but if you play it on a big system, you probably can. And this is the high end. But the high also has some sub coming through it now. So we need to do the opposite of what we did with the EQ8. Put the EQ8, I'm going to put it at the end of this chain, because if I put it before, then this redux is going to apply only to the signal that I feed it. If I put it after, it's going to apply the redux to the whole thing, including the sub, and then we get rid of the sub. So instead of going here and choosing a low pass filter, I'm going to go here and choose a high pass filter and bring this up. And now we can unsolo this. And now we can throw anything we want on this main one. We could put a flanger on it, maybe that would sound cool. Let's change the kick just for fun. Why not? Put that really hard one in there. Maybe the 7. It's a bit more ticky. Very cool. Now the last little trick I wanted to show you, one of the benefits of using MIDI tracks over audio tracks is we've got a whole set of MIDI effects here, which are things you can put before instruments. So usually effects go after the instrument, after the sound's been produced and you want to manipulate the sound in some way. MIDI effects go before the instrument. They go in between the information or the MIDI clip or the MIDI notes you're sending it, and they kind of grab the notes and do something to them before they send them to the actual instrument. So for example, here on the hats, what I'm going to use is an arpeggiator here. So an arpeggiator, if you're not familiar, arpeggiator takes a continuous note and then it kind of splits it into multiple notes at certain time intervals, and it can also split them into certain pitches as well. So it's really good for a synth. I'll just give you a really quick example. Here's a basic synthesizer, and it sounds like this, quite loud. I'm just playing a note on my QWERTY keyboard. If I put an arpeggiator, it's going to capture that note and it's going to play eighth notes instead. I can change the gate, which specifies how short the note is. I can make the rate faster. I can give it steps, so it's going to go up in octaves. If I play a chord, it's going to play all of those notes in succession. So that's usually what an arpeggiator is used for, but let me just get rid of that synth track. You can use it before a sampler to create some really interesting effects. So as I've got no steps here, it's just going to let the same note through, so it's still going to play the exact same note to trigger the right samples. But by changing the rate here, it's going to very quickly play heaps and heaps of those notes. So let's have a listen to how that sounds. So at the moment it's on sync mode, so it's giving us kind of increments that are in time with the BPM, which is 128. If we turn that into time mode, we have free control over how quickly it's going to stutter those notes. What's probably best to do here is to duplicate the hats, have this one with up. So this one we can delete the arpeggiator, because this one we kind of want to stay how it is. And then we can really mess with this one. And what I'm going to do is just hit record and record myself playing with this rate. Make sure we go back to the start. That'll do. What I might do is, some of these notes don't really work with it. It seems to only really like playing on that close hi-hat. So I'm just going to make all the notes that original close hi-hat. And make sure we drag this out. And another final thing is just to separate this from this, we could either pitch up that thing quite high, sound quite cool. Not really. So I'm going to use the trick that I usually use in most of my videos, which is to add a filter delay, which delays it on the left side, the right side, and in the middle by a certain amount. Turn off the middle, make both sides time mode. So remember, time means you can control it in milliseconds. Sync means you can control it in increments divisible by the BPM. We're going to have it on time mode and just have these kind of slightly apart, and it gives you a bit of space. Very quick way to give space to something. And we'll bring the volume down on the left and the right side. Maybe even a very slight reverb, very small size, very small time. Pitch the snare up a tiny bit. We can do that here in the root key. Bring it down. So there you go. That is the drum programming for a tech housey thing using multiple MIDI tracks. I did cheat and use one audio track just because it's quite hard to reverse something in a MIDI track, and we wanted that suck up thing. And that's it. TomCosm.com. Thanks for watching. See ya.